was very far down this route. Moving on, I would like to apologise. Unfortunately, Sarah Game, member for the Upper House, couldn't actually make it tonight. She's a phenomenal mother of a number of kids, and in her stead, she has sent a subject matter expert, her own mother, who happens to be running for the Senate for One Nation, Jennifer Game, who I had the great pleasure of bringing on my show recently. Jennifer is a dedicated advocate for Australian sovereignty, economic reform and tax fairness, standing with Senator Pauline Hanson as a Senate candidate for this upcoming election. She has a background in science, law and public policy, and she's going to be speaking about her daughter, Sarah Game's parental primacy bill that is going to be put before the South Australian Legislative Council. Jennifer, please welcome to the stage.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. I'm here tonight in my most important role as a grandmother. I've got three grandchildren, and my youngest, a few years ago, when I picked her up from reception, told me that she had learnt that day that she could be a boy or a girl, but that she had chosen to be a girl because she liked pink so much, and I told her that was a very good decision. That started me wondering about what was actually going on, and I wanted to share tonight just some of the things that I've learnt about, having come from a background really of tax law. So, these things have been eye-opening for me. The first thing I wanted to say is that it's generally believed that children develop a sense of their biological gender around the age of 3. And it's important to know that because, in part, it explains why there's such a focus on introducing children at a young age to the idea of gender fluidity. Because if they leave it beyond the age of 7, they're pretty set by then. So it's important, if you want to have this concept embedded in a child, that you get in early. So that's the first thing to know. I do want to acknowledge, however, that there are children who genuinely will experience, distress from a mismatch of their biological sex and their identity. But about 80% of the studies show will desist or outgrow that, and many of them studies show will turn out to be gay or bisexual. However, so I started to think to myself, well, if there's all this effort being put into gender fluidity in schools, there must be a problem that has to be solved. So I went to have a look at the Australian census. And in 2016, for the very first time, they asked people who didn't identify as being male or female whether they were intersex, transgender or non-binary. Now, on that night in August of 2016, 23 million people answered that question. So guess how many people answered the question that they were intersex, transgender or non-binary? 1,260. 1,260 out of 23 million. Now, a couple of years later, the Bureau of Statistics decided to look at those 1,260 replies, and they tell us that there were 80 people living in South Australia. So we had 80 people living in South Australia who identified as being intersex, transgender and non-binary. So I had a look at the age group breakdown because I wondered, well, how many, they must be all at school. No, only 4 of them were under the age of 15. So the chance of a child presenting at one of our 715 schools that there were then as being intersex, transgender or non-binary is pretty low, and the chance of you being in a classroom with someone who felt that way was even lower. And this started to get me thinking about what problem is the agenda for gender fluidity trying to solve. They've never asked that question again, so in the 2021 census they didn't ask that question. but they've come up since with an estimate that something like up to 1% of Australians are transgender or gender diverse. Well, that, they tell us, is 178,900 Australians back in December of 24. So clearly there's been a very big jump, is all I can say. And I just wondered what the reason is. Now, in that time, between 2016 and 2024, there's been reports of what they call rapid onset gender dysphoria. So this is where groups of children who know each other in a peer group, one's transgender and suddenly they all are, quite quickly. And you have to wonder, you know, how that's all happened. So this started me down the track of what could be going on, and I came to learn, to my surprise, great surprise, that a person's sex, there are now two theories about a person's sex. One is that it's socially constructed, and the other is it's biologically determined. Now, I would never have thought that there could ever have been any doubt, but apparently there's an enormous doubt. This idea is new. It's come about in the 80s and 90s. Started with a French philosopher who put forward, amongst his ideas about power in society, that gender is socially constructed. He was also a great supporter of lowering the age of consent in France, which at that time was 15. So at that time, 15 was too old for him and many other people who signed petitions to lower the age of consent so that children could have sex with adults and not find themselves in trouble with the law. These ideas were strongly supported by, would you believe, people who wanted to have sex with children, and not surprising. So here we are, we've got gender fluidity theory being taught to children as young as 4 in early learning in primary schools, and we've got the South Australian Department of Education adopting a gender affirming policy. And what this means is, like my 4-year-old, they're told that they can choose to be a boy or a girl, or in fact anything in between. And they start telling children this through storytelling books. So this starts at 4, and that is because this is a period of influence, because a child's identity or feelings of who they are, what their sex is still a bit open. And I'm not surprised about that, because the day that my granddaughter told me she could be a boy or a girl, she took to school, as she always does, her very soft toy that she goes to bed with, who, as far as she is concerned, is real. So here they are teaching children who believe their soft toys are real, that they can choose whether they're a boy or a girl. She had no idea, has no idea what that means, absolutely none. Anyway, gender fluidity is being taught initially through storytelling, with books like The Gender Fairy, Introducing Teddy, Princess Max, When Cathy is Keith, and When Leopard Lost His Spots, A Transparent Tale. These are just some of the commonly held titles in primary schools in South Australia that feature a transgender or diverse child as the lead character. Now, how do I know that? I know that because there was a study done in 2016 by the Flinders University where they went and reviewed a large number of the holdings of primary schools in South Australia, and they found 34 common titles where a gender diverse or transgender child was the lead character. Now, I'm guessing that those books are read, is my guess. But it's not only what's in classrooms or in libraries and what they're read to. There are posters, there are sing-songs, there's all sorts of teaching materials. And talk about gender diversity. If a child talks about gender diversity, the amount of attention they gain at school is very high. So you're going to get far more attention at school if you indicate that than you are if you're just not one of those children. So not only do children who identify whether they're groomed or not, I think actually gender diversity teaching is a form of mass indoctrination and mass grooming, but those children will be given the right to choose their own pronoun, to use the toilet of their choice, the change room of their choice, and to express their gender through their school uniform, and to be given the same rights as they would on camps and overnight stays. So what this means is that children who don't identify, which is at least 99 point something or other %, their views aren't important and they aren't counted. So if a girl feels uncomfortable about a boy in the changing room or sleeping overnight next to her, that's too bad. So that's how it is. So the safety and well-being of 99% or more of our children who simply identify as male or female are secondary to the rights of gender diverse children in our schools. So how did this all happen? And that's what really, I couldn't understand how this had happened. Certainly happened while I was, alive. But in 2013, the Labor Greens, almost slipped there, sorry about that, Labor Groom, sorry. Anyway, slip of the tongue there. In 2013, the Labor Greens government amended the Sex Discrimination Act in 1984, and they removed the definition of a man and they removed the definition of a woman. The definitions of a man and a woman were not put back into the law during the 3 terms of the Liberal government that followed, and there are no plans by either of the major parties to return biological reality to the law. So today the Sex Discrimination Act mentions the word sex 331 times, but there's no definition, only the definition for gender identity and intersex status. The effect of self-assessed gender identity is to protect, is to lose the protection, is protected, but biological sex is not. The change means for government, civic society and schools that we have to regard as true the false claim that biological men can be biological women and biological women can be biological men. So the consequences are wide-ranging and they include the loss of hard-won rights for women, but most importantly, the protection of children is reduced. I say that because legal protections to self-assessed gender identity mean schools are free to introduce the teaching of gender fluidity from the age of 4, and I know why, in places of learning, early learning in primary schools. And while parents spend their time creating a family life for their children and pay their bills, others, mostly who don't have children, have time to be involved in the debate about whether it's biology or society which determines gender identity. In my first job, of course it was a long time ago now, but in my first job I worked in the cytogenetics laboratory at a large teaching hospital, and my job was to take blood from parents and children so I could grow up the cells. I'd take photographs of the cells when they divided so I could see the chromosomes, and then cut those photographs up and found the 23 pairs, including the sex pair of XX for female and XY for males. I wrote a report and I gave it to a doctor, and that was the end of it. What I know out of studying genetics at university, and even though it's a while ago, the basics of these things haven't changed in my lifetime. The presence of an XX or an XY chromosome are the best predictor, the highest accuracy of whether you'll give birth to a male or female. And that has not changed. So to a very large degree, we are born to be who we are. Most children understand that they are male or female. A small number do not. I think these children deserve acceptance, but acceptance of gender confusion is not the same as affirmation. We need to remember that in fact you cannot change the cells you cannot change the cells in your body, because every single person sitting here tonight and every living person on the planet has got a pair of sex chromes in every cell of their body, and if you want to change that you're going to have to somehow suck out the chromosomes out of every cell in your body, and it just isn't going to be possible. So I'm afraid any thought that you can change your biological sex, it's just not possible. It is part of a much wider plan. Nevertheless, gender fluidity theory is just that. It's an idea, it's unproven, and it has a potential for harm, which we believe is high. There's no evidence that teaching gender fluidity causes no harm, but we are seeing an increase in children identifying as transgender, and this has increased during the same time as gender fluidity is being taught in our schools. Parents are not being given the opportunity to opt out of these classes because generally they don't know. The likelihood of harm to children and their families by the teaching of gender fluidity from the age of 4 is one of the reasons my daughter and the One Nation South Australian Legislative Council member Sarah Game has introduced a bill, the Education and Children's Services Parental Primacy Amendment Bill. The proposed legislation would prohibit the teaching of gender fluidity in schools and ideological education. The bill recognises the primacy of parents or legal guardians in relationship to education of a student's moral, ethical, political and social values and the matters of well-being and identity. I expect that when the next Parliament is formed, that One Nation will introduce a bill to restore biological reality to the law. The problem is these bills aren't going to be passed. We can propose all the legislation we like. As Senator Babette would know, there have been a number of motions before the Senate to have an inquiry into puberty blockers. There's been no support from the major parties. Now, why is that? Why are these parties not interested? And the reason is they think you're not interested. It hasn't been mentioned during this election as an issue. It's not a vote-turning issue. Broadly, there's apathy out there and no one's doing anything. And until parents start to make this a political issue and they start making their local member feel a bit less safe at the next election, you're not going to see any change at all, because unfortunately politics is a numbers game and there simply are not the numbers now in either of the major parties, either Liberal or Labor, the Greens of course as well. There are not the numbers. So we can put up all the bills that we like, we can debate it, we can try to bring awareness, but politicians in numbers will not act until you do, which is why Rachel's speech was very inspiring, and I hope that people will take up her challenge to go not only to protect their own child, but also in doing so protect every other child. Thank you.
You can see why I want to see her in the Senate throwing bombs, truth bombs. I've got to clarify, truth bombs. I've already had incitement charges in the past, but we won that in court. This is a very hot topic, and it does carry legal ramifications and lawsuits. So all the speakers here, I truly respect for what they are saying, and I'm very eager to get to the Q&A. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten about it, so please remember to write your questions. I've already got a dozen, but I want to throw it to you guys first. So don't be shy when we get to that. I'm very much looking forward to seeing, and full disclosure, the Turning Point Australia How to Vote cards in this state back conviction candidates, starting with Jennifer Game. I pray that we see her in the Senate for One Nation, backing up some phenomenal senators from this state like Senator Alex Antic and some other Freedom senators from around the country like Senator Hanson. And Senator Babbitt, of course, who doesn't, his term doesn't expire for 3 years. Moving on, the other co-organiser for this evening was Angela Rojas. Angela is a mum of young teenage girls. She's published a children's book, Be Cautious Little Ones, to teach her daughters about stranger danger. This was inspired by her years in the martial arts. She has been the treasurer, I didn't know that. She has been the treasurer on the school's governing council and a volunteer in the school library. After COVID, she homeschooled her daughter for 2 years and became aware of these inappropriate books in her library. Not happy, she decided to take action. Could you please welcome Angela?
Thank you, John. We'll get the slides up.